Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com. It's been a long time since I've actually done a video where you see me. And I don't know, I just kind of heard stuff and it got to the point where I had to say something. And this is mainly about billionaires in space. Everyone talking about Elon, about Richard Branson, about Jeff Bezos going up to space, spending their billions of dollars on these space ventures. And everyone being like, well, they should have spent that money to solve world hunger and pay their employees more. And it's just like, I understand the sentiment, like the frustration of seeing these sort of like larger than life ambitions during a time when so many people are struggling, so many people are sort of in a state of flux, can be jarring to certain minds. And that's fair. That's fair. Be like, this person's worrying about whether they can get to the moon when I'm worrying about, will I have breakfast tomorrow? Like, that's, an understandable feeling. Where, the magnitude of one's problems, or the scale of one's problems, when you put them in comparison, can sometimes be overwhelming or leave someone a bit unsettled. But it doesn't necessarily mean you should lose perspective. It doesn't necessarily mean that facts don't matter. So for example, let's talk about the different kind of claims that people say. Like, one is they should have spent that money to pay their employees more. This is a very typical misunderstanding of like the difference between someone's, like a CEO's like personal wealth versus like the company's wealth. So like, yes, Jeff Bezos has a net worth of billions and billions of dollars because of Amazon. But that billions and billions of dollars of net worth is not the same thing as the cash on hand or even the profits of Amazon. Someone's net worth is based on the value of their assets. So of course, Jeff Bezos, probably his primary asset is his stock in Amazon. So the reason why he has billions of dollars of net worth doesn't mean he has cash that he can actually spend billions of dollars of cash. It just means that on paper, theoretically, if you sold everything he owns, that's how much cash you would end up. A lot of people always think that, hey, if I'm a billionaire, it means I have $1 billion in cash that you can spend. Like, that's not kind of how it works. Okay? Theoretically, if you could sell all your assets at their current valuation, then you would have that net worth number. But that's not reality. Most people's actual, like, if they were to sell everything they owned, would not get what they state on their balance sheet. So oftentimes people's actual worth, if they had to do a fire sale, meaning they had to rush and sell everything right away, is going to be a lot less. Okay, because for a variety of reasons. So that's different than the corporate bank account of Amazon. So when people buy stuff from Amazon, that money goes to the corporate account, and the Amazon corporate account pays all the employees, pays anybody who works at Amazon's salary. And they may or may not have necessarily money left over. And that's going to be a lot different. There's not necessarily billions and billions of dollars just sitting there in cash for them to necessarily pay their employees more, even though they do, if I remember correctly, as far as other people who hire, like let's say warehouse workers and stuff like that, for similar positions, Amazon does generally pay, I think, more than many other places, which makes sense for it strategically. Okay. Because generally, like, if you're familiar with like Amazon's strategy, like it generally doesn't actually make a profit. Like it generally, like, Amazon's focus for years has always been growing sales. Okay, so oftentimes it sells things at like near cost, at cost. It pays its employees more. The strategy being so competitive price wise and being able to track sort of like the best in these particular spaces that it's kind of hard to compete with them. Okay. Because you just can't really charge more, and you can't pay your employees more, so you can't get quality employees because they're working at Amazon, because Amazon pays a little bit more, and no one's buying your stuff because Amazon charges a little bit less. Okay, and they've accepted that, hey, for a period of time, that's probably going to result in like no profits or little profits, but in the long run, they'll have a greater market share. So even though the profits as a percentage may be slimmer, the absolute dollar amount may be greater because you sell more. Okay, and that, so a lot of the criticism of Amazon is oftentimes like kind of weird. Like, yes, everyone can always imagine a company doing more. This is true. Okay, and generally everyone can imagine a world where people are better off, and but again, you have to kind of compare it to like the actual resources. You see this kind of mistake, the same thing with like McDonald's, where basically people say like, hey, McDonald's has all this money, why doesn't it spend that on its employees? But that misses like the whole like thing that McDonald's actually doesn't run majority of McDonald's stores. They're franchisers. So the money that's actually available to pay those employees isn't McDonald's money, it's the franchise owner's money, which is oftentimes a lot less. Like the actual profit margin on owning a McDonald's franchise is a lot less than the McDonald's company, because the McDonald's company makes most of its money on the real estate that those franchises are on, franchising fees. It's a different business than people realize it is. You can compare it to Wendy's, where Wendy's actually operates more of the stores that it owns and has much slimmer profit margins. Then there's Walmart. They make the same mistake with the Walton family, where they say, well, you know, the Wall, they're worth this much money, but like, again, let's say we talk about like Jeff Bezos' billions of dollars. Yes, he self-financed using the money he made from Amazon to pay for the space venture, but it doesn't necessarily mean he took money that was available to use for Amazon employees. That means he sold his stock in the company, and the stock isn't necessarily cash available to the company. The stock just means ownership. It's just basically a claim on the future profits. So essentially, the cost that Jeff Bezos cost theoretically could be a lot greater than what he paid out, because not only did he spend whatever dollar amount that he sold of his stock to pay for all these things, but he also gave up the claim on the future profits. And now those future profits are going to go to whoever bought those Amazon shares, which could be pension funds, could be other rich investors, could be mom and pop investors. A lot of people have exposure to Amazon because it's such a large stock. You know, people at all different levels tend to own it. So those people get the claim on the future profits of Amazon, and Jeff Bezos, at least for that portion of whatever he sold, has given up those future claims. Okay, but that's again different than like this pot of money. So basically, someone else just took his spot. Like, imagine that you're sitting there waiting for like, let's say you're waiting for a banana to ripen, right? Okay, you're sitting there, you're waiting, and this banana's gonna ripen someday. Okay. Now, if you just wait, you get the whole banana. Okay, but you don't necessarily want to wait. You would like to get some enjoyment now. So what you do is you go to somebody else and say, hey, you can get half the banana when it ripens if you give me, like, let's say 50 cents now. So now you've sold your claim on the ripe banana that'll be there in the future, but you got your 50 cents now, and maybe you get like a quarter of a banana now somewhere. Okay, and then, you know, basically that math doesn't quite add up. That must be a really good banana, but the point being is that essentially when you're selling stock, what you're doing is you're selling your claim on the future. You're saying, you know what, I'm entitled to this in the future, but I need money now, so I'm going to say, hey, you can take my future claim, I'll take your money now. That has nothing to do with the money the company has, because the company is the banana. Okay, the banana hasn't changed just because I sold half of my claim to the banana to somebody else. The banana's still there, and the banana's still waiting to be ripe. Same thing with the company. Okay, the cash position, the financial position of the company doesn't financially change. Just who owns it, who has the claims have changed. Okay, so point being, like, there's Jeff Bezos' net worth, which is a paper number. Again, doesn't actually mean he has billions of dollars he can just spend. Although it doesn't necessarily mean he doesn't have access to it. What a lot of wealthy people will do is they don't necessarily sell their assets, they borrow against their assets. So very possible that Jeff Bezos didn't give up any of his ownership in Amazon, but instead borrowed against it and financed it through lending money that is collateralized by those shares, which probably is a smarter way to go, because then you get to still own the shares. This would be like, hey, I have the claim on the banana, and what I do is I say, hey, can I borrow 50 cents from you? But if I don't pay you back, you get half the banana. But if I pay you back, I still get the whole banana, and I have the 50 cents. This was referred to as debt financing. Generally, the smarter way to go if you have lots of collateral, because then you get to keep the collateral. As long as you pay the bill, you get to keep your collateral and get the extra capital. So I'm assuming something like that. Again, this is why you hire financiers. They're going to figure out sort of like what is going to be the smartest way for you to raise money, because there's all sorts of other considerations as far as like potential risk, opportunity cost, things you have to consider. But again, it's not any money that Jeff Bezos raised by either borrowing against his assets or selling his assets are not necessarily. It's like me saying, if I were to sell stock, like let's pretend I own stock at McDonald's. That's like me saying that some of the value of my stock I should be just, feel like, well, I'm going to just take a little piece of the stock and give it to the employees. But then it's like the point of owning the stock was to have that claim on future growth. If it's confiscated from you, then what was the point? And then why invest? And then no companies get started. Cool. So that's like the first claim. The second claim is like, why don't they spend their money on solving world hunger instead? Okay. So on this one, it assumes that they aren't doing any philanthropy at all. Okay. I would say a lot of wealthy people are doing at least some level of philanthropy, because at least some level of it just on its face makes sense for tax purposes. So there's some philanthropy. It might be going to the ballet. It might be going to world hunger. It might be going to providing mosquito nets. All sorts of different like interesting causes that are out there. And then that money actually does get put to use. Like that money employs people at the different sort of charitable places that it goes to, and also benefits people on the actions that those charitable places take out to. But again, it still just like presupposes like this that nothing has been given back up to that point. When now I'm not saying every billionaire has necessarily given back. I mean, there's always like the issue of like, hey, someone just kind of stumbled across a whole bunch of money, and okay, so somebody somewhere did something that resulted in financial gains that employed people, that those gains then get reinvested, that allows us to fuel other enterprises. Those enterprises fuel other like people's investments. That there's like there's all, and then sometimes you invented a technology that allowed somebody else to create something that makes transformative changes to the world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think a meme that I've been seeing going a lot around was like the Wright brothers, where like they were like people who were blowing a lot of money on this, what seemed like a fancy idea of going to go fly into yonder. But the end result is that helped fuel what became flight, and allowed us to do not just transnational, like with international flight, intranational flight, would be interstate flight, like just allowed us to travel further, which allowed the world to be more connected. And a more connected world, one, dissipates, as much as we like see conflict in the world, it actually dissipates conflict, because we're no longer just like these, we're no longer these like people around the world are no longer just these people you hear stories about, and you have these sort of gross exaggerations in your mind because all you hear is stories. They're people you've met. They're people you've interacted with. They're people who live in your world. So that is a huge contribution that has led to more peace, has led to more commerce, which has led to more wealth for more people. You got to realize that technically we are living in sort of a point in time with like the least amount of people starving, the least amount of people. Like, you may be imagining that your life could be better, okay? But one, your life is probably a lot better off than you realize. It's just, again, it comes down to like, what do you compare it to? Do you compare it to like where you could be, how much you could have or how much you could not have, or just where you were? Okay, oftentimes the best comparison is like, are you progressing? And that gives you, to me personally, like I feel like that gives you a lot more agency, because because you have a lot more control over like, hey, here's where I was yesterday, here's where I am today. It just sets you in the right mindset. But there's just this mindset that they see like if people have like too much better a life, and this is just sort of like offensive to their senses. Like it is what it is. Again, probably in a more free market world, some of these like gaps, I would say, like between the bottom and the highest, probably would be less when you really think about it, because how do free markets work? And again, I'm not saying markets generically, free markets meaning like very low, very basically no sort of artificial barriers to entry, and there might be natural barriers to entry. Just some things just are really kind of hard to get into, but the idea is that it's just basically people are allowed to participate in whatever industry they want on their own accord and allocate their property as they like. What happens is that what's going to happen is if there is a huge return in something, people are going to reallocate their resources towards that. That's how it goes. Okay. People are going to chase after the thing that kind of not necessarily makes the most. I think that's people look at it too simplistically. It's what makes the most within a reasonable amount of risk. Okay, so it's risk and reward. There's it's sort of a matrix of these things. And so in that case, and that's how countries around the world have gotten developed. Basically, what happens is that the risk and reward matrix has moved around and caused people to invest in different parts of the world, and the world has become more developed for it, which has allowed all sorts of really good things to happen. And this is all good. Now again, it's never perfect because the world is constantly in flux, technology is constantly in flux, markets are constantly in flux, and there's frictions out of that. Okay, one industry dies, another industry grows, and there's people who get displaced in that whole mix. But the process itself makes a lot of sense and works, even when it's not working in a 100% free context. Now, where basically markets are fairly controlled. People who think we're anything near a free market right now, we have a very controlled market, and a lot of the times the problems are because of those controls, because they distort sort of the incentives, they distort people, they distort sort of the natural way capital will flow and cause capital to sort of congregate, because people don't have enough competition to split that up more, because there's artificial barriers to entry. So what happens is hey, if I'm it's super hot summer and I'm the first one making lemonade, I'm gonna have a huge sort of profit. I'm gonna be able to make lemonade for $2 and sell it for $10. Now naturally what would happen is that everyone else would be that's a great idea, let me go set up a lemonade stand next to yours, but I'm gonna go charge $9. So now they're paying the same too, making $9, but my sales are reduced, so then I have to lower my price. And what happens is competition kind of grows until everyone finds there's only the right number of people at the right price that everyone is happy with, sort of the status quo. And even that's still constantly changing. But when you have artificial barriers to entry, so let's say I charge I pay $2 for the lemonade and I sell it for $10, but then government says no one else, you have to get a lemonade license to sell stuff here. And now, so basically, and I'm friends with the person who issues the lemonade licenses, so now no one can get a lemonade license. Well, then, yeah, I'm going to accrue a lot more money than I probably would have otherwise, because I had an unfair lack of competition. And that's the kind of thing that happens a lot in the economy nowadays. People find some way to make some sort of control sound very benevolent, but at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is some industry, some actor somewhere trying to control their competition in the name of benevolence, and basically accruing a lot for it. Yeah, but the point is let me just kind of get my mind back to where I was going. You can't solve world hunger by just taking the money of billionaires. One, we're assuming that they haven't done anything, which again, everyone through their economic activity is contributing something somewhat. But at the same time, they just wouldn't have enough wealth. If you take a look at the problem world hunger, theoretically, if you confiscated everyone's money, every billionaire's money, at best you might have enough. I don't think you even would have enough money to buy everybody food for a year. And then what happens next year? Okay, that wealth doesn't grow back into another bunch of $1 billion the next year. There's a context in which that wealth has existed. And again, we're assuming that all that wealth can be sold for market value. A lot of that wealth isn't actual money, isn't actual cash you can spend. It's a theoretical number based on what we think we could sell your stuff at. But if we just sold everybody's stuff at the same day, you're not getting that much money. So you end up with a lot less money. You'll just have a lot of wealth just evaporate into thin air because of just stupidity. Because in reality, wealth is a function of time. Let's say you have $1 million worth of properties, but you cannot sell all those properties now for $1 million. But theoretically, in a healthy market, and you you have the room to find the time to find the right buyers, maybe you could liquidate your assets for whatever your net worth is. But again, there's an aspect of time and all these things. But yeah, you couldn't necessarily solve that problem that day, and if you did, you'd only solve it temporarily. Less people are hungry nowadays, but a lot of it's from changes in technology, and then people have complaints about those changes in technology. They don't like things that like innovations that have made crops last longer, because they're like they make them maybe less healthy, but having an affordable food option is better than having no food options. Less people starving is definitely better than more people starving. There's always demand for better, and there's always going to be demand for something better. So there'll always be a market, someone trying to figure that out. But there's no magic. You can't just sit there and say, hey, like, you have this big amount of money, you can solve the problem, because it's not even the money that solves the problem. It's more of a problem of efficiency. Like, okay, not only can we grow more food, but how can we better distribute food? And that's where the competition comes in. Like, grocery stores are big chains of distribution, and they're all competing to see who is the best distributor. And because of that, more people are going to have more varieties of food accessible to them. But absent that competition, and again, everyone's trying to solve different problems. So at the end of the day, like, that investment that is being made in space may pay off huge dividends down the road. And if it doesn't, if you're still just not a fan of billionaires, you just really don't like billionaires, wouldn't you rather they be doing these kind of high risk things that might very likely result in their death then? Why, that's how you feel? Like, I don't feel that way, but theoretically, like, they are not only like putting their wealth on the line, but they're putting their lives on the line, especially in the case of like Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson, who were like on the ships. I mean, those things could have easily exploded, and they'd be gone. So, like, oftentimes it's the wealthy or the guinea pigs, because they're going to be the early adopters. They're the ones who are going to pay a lot more for something that just became available that is unproven. Okay, they're going to be the ones who are going to buy like the first generation of like PS6s, and those PS6s are probably going to break because they're untested, and they paid a whole lot more for them. But when the second and third generation comes around, and the kinks have been worked out and the price is lower, I'm going to benefit from them being the guinea pigs, and that's generally how it works. Now, of course, this can frustrate people when it comes to such more important things like medicine. Okay, the rich are the first in line for this medicine, that medicine. But again, they're still the guinea pigs. They're still the first people to find out, hey, is this all that it's cracked out to be? And they're probably paying a premium. That's just kind of like how it works. So, point is, like, life's too short to be sitting there like spending your time being mad about billionaires. And at the end of the time, like, if you put things in context, things are working okay. They can work better, but oftentimes the things that'll make it work better is giving people more freedom to do what they want with their stuff, because it allows us to create the incentives, to create the dynamics in the market that'll lead people to make different allocations of their capital, or to accumulate capital. And the best thing you can be doing is deciding how you're going to divvy up your wealth. Like, again, when you work for 8 hours a day, that income, that represents your time. You could allocate it towards leisure. You could sit there and say, work 8 hours and then pay for 8 hours worth of leisure, or spend that 8 hours on some level of leisure. Or you could invest some of it, and then later on, you could double the leisure that you could enjoy because you were patient. Okay, because you waited for that banana to ripen, you now receive the banana instead of just some change. And the sad thing is, like, probably the people who need to listen to this are not going to even listen to this and get this far. But if you did, and I changed how you thought about something, or got you to think a little bit deeper about something, please do leave a comment on the video or give me your thoughts. But I just wanted to talk about that because, that bared discussing. Have a great day and enjoy. And again, this is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com. Head over to Alex Merced. You can find my other videos, my podcasts, all the other things that I do. And you have a wonderful day.